記錄嘅錄製嘅。咁如果你係需要嘅時候咧，咁你可以翻轉頭再睇下。
So, nada más queremos dejarles saber que esta junta va a ser grabada. So, si quieren, lo que pueden hacer es, si no quieren que graben sus caras, pueden nada más apagar su imagen ahorita.
呢個畫面可能出現同意呢個字眼，如果你同意，你點擊一個藍嘅掣。
Okay. Once again, welcome. My name is Rachel Vitania, and I will be helping to facilitate this meeting. This evening, we have 3 wonderful presenters, all administrators at our sites. So we have Virginia Kwok. She is the principal at Wilson. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a moment. Jillian Boley, she's vice principal at Wilson. And then we have Nick Easter, who is the vice principal at Bancroft.
咁我哋嘅主持係 Miss Vicarious， 佢係我哋 McKinney 小學嘅校長。咁我哋今日有3個講員，Miss Kwok 係 Wilson 小學嘅校長 ，Miss Bowie 係我哋 Wilson 小學嘅副校長，仲有係 Mr. Esther 係我哋 Bancroft 初中嘅副校長，佢會同我哋講解一啲重要嘅事項。
So, buenas tardes, tenemos aquí las personas que van a presentar esta noche, la señora Jillian, que es la subdirectora en la escuela Wilson, y el señor Nick Easter, que es un subdirector de la escuela intermediaria Bancroft.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started.
我哋而家分享影評，即刻開始我哋嘅內容。
Voy a empezar a compartir aquí ahorita para que puedan ver lo que vamos a estar presentando.
Quick thumbs up if you can see my screen. So we're going to skip this slide because we don't have the translation services going, and we'll move on.
我哋今日冇翻譯系統開到嚇，咁我哋跳過呢幾個畫面。
Solo vamos a hacer la primera porque no tenemos el cuarto de interpretación prendido.
Just a reminder that if you need support with issues, please contact your child's teacher. If you have trouble with the teacher, please contact your school administrator.
想提醒大家，如果你哋小朋友喺學習上或者係功課上有問題，同翻老師聯絡；又或者係如果你個科技上有問題嘅，就同學校辦公室嘅行政人員聯絡。但係如果你中文係有困難嘅，你隨時聯絡我，我會幫助你解決呢啲問題。
Cualquier cosa, problema, además les dejamos saber que pueden contactar su administrador.
If you're having technical issues, you can contact the parent facilitator who is assigned to your child's school.
任何時候喺科技上面或者係電腦出現咗問題，可以同你哋學校嘅家長聯絡人聯絡。
Si tienen un problema técnico, además les dejamos de saber y recordarles que pueden contactar a su facilitador de padres, y aquí está, dependiendo su escuela, quién es.
And if you're still having issues, you can contact our tech department.
最後，如果真係有困難咧，同科技部聯絡。
Y si siguen teniendo problemas después de eso y no pueden, no reciben ayuda o no pueden resolucionar su problema, pueden contactar el departamento tecnológico.
And here are our contacts for Bancroft, Muir, and San Leandro High School for any technical issues.
你見到係我哋兩間初中同高中裏面科技部嘅聯絡員可以同佢哋聯絡。
Y aquí están los contactos para la escuela John Muir y Bancroft.
Okay, and welcome to tonight's Family Learning Series, in which we will be discussing supporting our children in difficult times.
好，我哋今日個家長系列個講嘅主題係喺困難時期撫養我哋嘅孩子。
Y bienvenidos esta noche a lo que es el apoyo a nuestros niños en tiempos difíciles y de crisis.
And with that, I turn it over to our facilitators, Principal Kwok, Principal Foley, and Principal Easter.
好，我哋讓我哋Miss Clark Wilson 校長同我哋講解呢一部分嘅內容。
Y con eso se lo voy a dar a nuestros presentadores, la señora directora, la señora Virginia Quack, la señora Bowie y el señor Nick Easter.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you to discuss something that is likely on everyone's mind because we are living through difficult times together.
啱啱講係我哋嘅副校長 Miss Bowie， 佢而家講啊，我哋其實而家大家都面對同樣嘅問題，我哋而家經歷緊一個同樣嘅困難，大家都面對咗同樣嘅情況㗎。
Bienvenidos esta noche a lo que es apoyando a nuestros niños en tiempos difíciles, porque es muy importante recibir apoyo en estos tiempos.
Tonight, we'll discuss what trauma is, some protective factors to build resilience in our children and ourselves. And then we'll talk about now what is our plan for supporting our children in these difficult times.
咁啊，我哋講乜嘢係創傷嚇，咁同埋咧就我哋有啲乜嘢係正面嘅因素可以保護我哋嘅小朋友，幫助佢哋復原。咁而家我哋就面對呢個疫情啦。咁而家我哋可以做啲乜嘢呢？同埋最後我哋我哋會開放回答家長嘅問題。
So, esta noche vamos a discutir qué es el trauma, los factores de protección, ahora qué y cómo que ayudar a nuestros niños que sean resilientes. Y también vamos a llegar al punto donde van a hacer preguntas y respuestas.
Okay, we can move to the next. Thank you. So before we begin, we'll engage in one of the protective factors, which is to slow down and center ourselves, connect, and breathe. We'll do a 3, 2, 1, and I'll explain that after translation.
當我哋面對困境嘅時候，面對一個好讓自己覺得自己喺度又面對一個傷害或者係個內心嘅精神嘅時候，我哋要做乜嘢係正面嘅因素，將自己去復原咧，就要靜落嚟，深呼吸，同埋同人聯繫，身邊要有人喺度。
So, vamos a empezar con algo que es un ejercicio que vamos a hacer, que se llama 2, 3, 1, y ahorita les voy a explicar lo que es.
Okay, so the 3
con una
is to think of 3 people you love.
首先你要諗下你最愛嗰3個人。
So, el 3 es pensar en 3 personas a las cuales ustedes quieren.
Okay, and the 2 is to think of 2 things that make you smile.
跟住諗下2樣會令你笑嘅事情。
Y el número 2 es pensar en 2 cosas que te hacen sonreír.
And our 1 is to take a deep, nurturing breath. And I like to put one hand on my stomach and one hand on my heart and take a really deep, calm breath.
跟住第一步最重要呢一步就係深呼吸，一隻手擺喺自己個胸，一隻手擺喺自己嘅心裏面，深呼吸。
Y el 1 es poner tu mano ya sea en el estómago o en tu cabeza y respirar profundamente.
Okay, I'll pass it over to Mr. Easter to talk a little bit about what is trauma.
好，我哋副校長 Mr. Easter 同我哋講下乜嘢係創傷。
Y ahora se lo voy a pasar al señor Nick Easter para que siga con la presentación.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming and first of all, just sticking with us during these challenging times. I know you have little ones and I do too, so definitely appreciation for being here.
Because you're found it. I thought you had it all in one.
Mr. Easter, can you speed up? I'm not able to hear much.
Oh, you can't hear it? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but a little louder, please. Yeah.
Might be my.
Okay.
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 Oh, can you go back on the slide? I don't know what happened.
Good.
So anywho, want to start by sharing a story. We're going to talk about trauma, but wanted to share a story really quick. Back in November, my family and I, we drove down to a cabin in the woods somewhere. And on my last day, I took my camera out to take a few pictures for some alone time.
Mr. Esther 佢哋同我分享一個故事先。11月份咧，佢一家人就去咗個森林裏面，喺一間小屋裏面居住，幾日休息。咁啊，最尾嗰日佢拎咗個相機出嚟。
En octubre, el señor Easter y su familia fueron de paseo y sacó su cámara para tomar esta foto.
After I was gone for about 30 minutes, my dad told me that my wife had gone looking for me. So I guess we had just missed each other.
Mhm.
And I went back outside to find her, and I saw her walking up with tears in her eyes.
咁佢自己行開咗30分鐘，佢太太就出去揾佢，跟住佢翻嚟嘅時候咧，佢爸爸話俾佢聽，你太太揾佢啊，咁佢同太太錯過咗，佢哋即係30分鐘，最後佢揾到太太，佢太太裏面眼裏面有好多淚水喺度。
Después de eso, cuando regresé, mi papá me dijo que mi esposa me estaba buscando, y ya después de rato regresó ella, pero con lágrimas en sus ojos.
Initially, I was like, man, I just want some alone time really quick. But when I saw her tears, I just started to listen, and I realized that she feared something bad happened to me. Last spring, a lot of you might have seen the story of Ahmaud Arbery, who went running in the woods and was unfortunately murdered.
咁雖然只係一個短30分鐘，但係原來咧佢太太揾唔到佢嘅時候，個腦海裏面咧就好多擔憂引致到佢係驚恐同埋好擔心咁嗰個情緒就出現咗啦。
Inicialmente yo solamente quería tiempo para mí solo, pero después de que la vi a ella llorando, me sentí mal, y entendí que ella estaba preocupada porque no sé si ustedes escucharon, pero hace unos meses, un señor fue corriendo en el bosque y terminó asesinado.
So while I thought it was overreaction at first, I realized her trauma was coming up from things that she had seen or heard of, whether it's on TV, but also from losing her father at the age of 8 to violence.
咁佢起初以為佢太太咧就自己覺得，嘿，佢太過大反應啫，但係想了解到裏面咧就係佢經歷佢即係從媒體上面咁。喺野外裏面會發生啲咩事意外咁好多，同埋嘢就係話佢父親啦咁樣，佢自己以往嘅經歷裏面咧，促成咗佢當其時係好擔憂、好傷心嗰段時間。
Inicialmente sentí que estaba teniendo una reacción demasiado exagerada, pero después de recordar por los traumas que ella ha pasado y lo que ella ha visto en la televisión y que también a la corta edad de 8 años, cuando era pequeña, fue su padre asesinado, cambié mi opinión.
So we can go to the next slide. So what is trauma? There's a definition here. It's the experience of an event or enduring conditions in which there's a perceived threat to life, bodily injury, belonging or dignity, and the individual's ability to cope or integrate the emotions involved is overwhelmed.
咁佢頭先佢想講出就係佢太太嗰個就係一個創傷嚟嘅。咁創傷嘅定義就係而家我哋再睇到咧，就係人一個經歷過一個經歷㗎。而呢個經歷係曾經係持久咁發生過，而呢個經歷裏面咧，讓佢促成咗係對生命咧係覺得係被危害啦，又或者係受到威脅，甚至係個人嘅情緒情感係受到威脅。咁佢咪有一個無力感去應付，承擔唔到，咁呢個就叫創傷啦。
Entonces pensamos, ¿qué es trauma? Es experimentar un evento o vivir en condiciones en las que existen una amenaza percibida para la vida, lesiones corporales, pertenencia y o dignidad. Y en el número 2, la capacidad del individuo para sobrellevar e integrar las emociones sentidas es obligante.
We can go to the next slide. And actually, let's skip this one just for the sake of time as well. So thank you. So there are different ways trauma can impact the way we react to stressful situations. Generally speaking, the usual healthy responses to stress fall into 4 different categories.
咁當我哋呢個創傷出現咗嘅時候咧，我哋需要去面對。但係而家咧，我哋講咗4個比較健康，我哋用一個健康嘅態度、健康嘅方式嚟去應對我哋呢啲情緒嘅壓力、呢啲創傷嘅壓力。
I think you could go to the next slide. There. Sorry, thank you. Ms. Garcia, did you get a chance to translate or did I miss it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. So, entonces, esto trauma llega en 4 categorías y ahorita vamos a explicar lo que pasa cuando estamos teniendo estos traumas.
Okay. So we have one of those responses to trauma can be fight, where you want to approach the situation or the threat directly. Another one might be flight, where you want to try to get away.
第一個方法你就同佢鬥過啦嚇，你奮勇反抗咧。第二個方法你可以用逃避啦，逃離嘅情況啦。
So una de las respuestas al estrés es escapar.
Another reaction might be to freeze. You might get shocked by whatever's going on and just don't know what to do. Freeze like a deer in headlights. Another one might be appease, meaning that we try to maybe minimize the threat, the reality of the threat, or cater to it in hopes that it will just leave us alone.
第3個方法你可以選擇咧，就係冷靜咁去面對啦，將自己停咗落嚟啦，咁去面對。第4個方法咧，你可以好似呢個咁見到係讓步啦，或者係放棄一啲，咁係做一個共識啦。
La otra es congelarse, esperando que la otra persona o el incidente, quedándose uno quieto, ya no siga ocurriendo.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. And there should be some images. Okay, so if we think about some different scenarios, if I'm in the woods and I see a bear, me personally, I'm probably going to go into flight and run away. Might not be the best idea, but that's probably what I'm going to do. Someone else, one of you crazy people out there, might go into fight and try to wrestle the bear. I don't know how that's going to go, but
咁假設啦，你喺個森林裏面，你見到隻紅人，我就會講完咧，就係話佢會用逃跑作為佢去應對呢個情況嚇。有人可能會同佢鬥過，但係以佢個性格或者佢個選擇裏面，佢會選擇去逃避，去逃走啦。
So, mi reacción, por ejemplo, si yo estuviera en un bosque y se viera un oso, eso es exactamente lo que yo haría, me frisaría.
Now, some of us, we might freeze. I might freeze. We see the bear. And I'm not sure how this would work, but some of you might try to appease the bear. Maybe you offer a snack that's maybe more tasty than you and hope that he leaves you alone. But we also might think of, what if this bear is not a bear, but a person?
咁或者你可能會選擇定喺度唔喐啦，去面對隻紅人啦。但係而家就諗啦，嗰隻唔係紅人嚟，係一個人嚟嘅，係呢個人俾到壓力你啊，咁你會點應對啊？
Otra cosa que también podemos hacer es darle comida para así pensando que a lo mejor con eso ya no lo va a seguir a uno o va a estar pendiente a lo que estamos haciendo nosotros.
So if it's a person, maybe you're thinking about a bully. Maybe we try to run of, maybe we directly approach the bully. Hopefully a fight doesn't break out, but it could. We might freeze, or we might try to be friends and hope the bully leaves us alone, or that person that's causing the threat.
咁呢個可能係人，呢個人其實就可能係欺凌你嚇，你啲壓力就由呢個欺凌嚟。咁你選擇點咧？你可能會亦都係逃避，你可能會同佢鬥過，又或者可能你係定咗喺度冷靜咁，又或者你選擇咧同佢交朋友，讓步。
Otra cosa, pues nosotros como personas, es que a veces cuando hay un agresor, lo que queremos hacer es que a lo mejor queremos que sean amigos, que estar su amigo de él o de ella, o también tenemos la misma reacción, que es nada más de frizarnos.
Now, what if I said these same reactions or responses to trauma can come from things that we just witness, even watching on TV, or things that we hear, whether it's deaths on TV or protests or the Capitol insurrection. How might we respond to those things that we see, and how might our young people be responding?
咁而家我哋睇啦，頭先講呢啲情況啊，呢啲情況係喺電視裏面睇嘅，被欺凌啦，又或者最近發生嗰啲仇恨啊、鬥爭啊，或者係我哋個國會發生咁多事情裏面呢啲咁嘅，好似發生咗喺你眼前，你會有啲咩反應咧？想像下你啲小朋友睇到晒呢啲情況，佢哋嘅情緒又會係有啲咩影響嘅咧？
Y casi les diría que estos traumas o estrés que están causando puede ser por cosas que estamos viendo en la televisión, como cuando entraron al Capitolio o otras cosas que hemos estado ahorita recientemente viendo.
There's something called vicarious trauma, where the experience of others or things that we see in the world around us can cause us to be traumatized. Even if we might be hearing something like as a teacher, I might be hearing something that's going on with the student, or as a parent, I might be hearing something that's going on with my child, and it could be traumatic for me as well.
嗱，呢啲咧就係雖然通過係媒體啊，或者係佢自己去感受到、了解到呢啲事情發生啦，呢啲都會係引致到咧係有一個創傷，影響到小朋友㗎。
Y también hay cosas como padres que nosotros estamos viendo vemos, que les pueden afectar a nuestros hijos.
We can go to the next slide. So these are some symptoms that can arise from trauma, but not all of them, but there's some things that you might be able to notice. So some effects of trauma could be an impact on having healthy relationships. In some cases, it can harm memory because it's very connected to the brain. I didn't explain that earlier, but sorry. But make it harder for us to learn and focus. There could be trouble eating, affecting our appetite. Hard for us to control our emotions. Could affect our sleeping patterns. There's also that increased chance of developing different diseases like cancers and heart issues and all sorts of things. And then there's anxiety, depression, PTSD. I'll stop there.
咁如果一個人咧佢其實存在咗佢自己係有呢個創傷症嘅時候，或者係已經受到呢啲創傷影響嘅時候咧，有啲症狀我哋可以意會得到嘅，可以留意到嘅，就變得唔係咁健康啦。最主要係就係嗰個同別人相處個關係唔好啦，同埋記憶力又唔好啊，或者學習唔得專注啦，食嘢又唔想食啊，情緒嘅方面咧係波動啦，睡眠又唔好啦，仲有咧就係身體生病嘅機會咧有啲大增咗。同埋你會見到呢個人好多時候都會頻繁嘅焦慮，同埋有啲抑鬱嘅症狀出現咗嘅。Joanna?
Y también síntomas de trauma que dijo el señor Easter, que no había dicho antes, pero que está conectado con el cerebro, son cosas como reacciones enfermizas, mala memoria, dificultad para aprender a enfocarse, problemas para comer, se les quita el apetito o no tienen apetito o a lo mejor comen de más, regulación emocional, dificultad para dormir, mayor probabilidad de desarrollar enfermedades, ansiedad, depresión o trastorno de estrés postraumático.
So I would go into defining all these things, but we don't have all that much time. But I would want to say that thinking about flight, the flight, fight, freeze, appease, and how we respond to trauma can be really impacted when we have those traumatic experiences, which can be scary for our young people because they can't necessarily turn off those responses and don't know why they're responding that way, and what would maybe seem a regular situation like being in a classroom per se, and not in the woods or with an abuser.
咁就了解下，好多通常我哋有4個反應嘅。咁當一個孩子裏面佢面對呢啲情況嘅時候啦，當佢自己係內心裏面有一個創傷嘅時候，好多時候佢都會係用呢4個反應去做。咁我哋要小心要留意啦。咁同埋咧就係點樣去引導佢哋。
Y ahorita a lo mejor los niños están experimentando este tipo de estrés porque no están en el salón de clase versus estando, por decir, como estábamos platicando hace ratito, cuando están en el bosque. Son diferentes, pero al final de cuentas es esto.
Okay, and before I pass it on to my colleagues, I want to say that it can be sometimes hard to see how it's popping up for ourselves, but our young people. But if you're noticing changes in behavior and you're having good communication, just try to notice different things. If things feel off, please don't feel hesitant to reach out to us or other folks for support, because it's really important. Sometimes we may not have all the tools necessary, and there's no shame in getting outside support. And we really want to get used to making that normal and healthy.
重要嘅係咧，我哋小朋友係有可能係已經係面對緊咁嘅情況，係存在緊呢個問題。我哋未必有足夠嘅認識或者係資源去處理、去幫助我哋嘅小朋友。咁你哋通過呢個可以了解到一啲情況，但係有時候係你自己係未必可以應付到。最重要嘅就係必須要同學校接觸，或者同另外一啲人接觸，去尋求一啲意見同支援嘅千祈唔好咧就係擺埋唔去出聲啦，所以咧就必須要同另外一啲人接觸，同學校接觸，尋求支援。
Y por favor, si está notando cualquiera de estas cosas, antes de si quiere pedir ayuda, por favor, no se sienta con vergüenza. Porque a veces ahorita muchos niños están pasando por muchas diferentes situaciones y no tiene que tener vergüenza en pedir ayuda, porque a veces nosotros mismos no sabemos cómo ayudarles y hay muchas personas que le pueden ya sea ayudar o mandarlo a una persona que le pueda ayudar con cualquiera de estas cosas que están sintiendo sus estudiantes.
I'm going to pass it on to my wonderful colleagues. Go over some protective factors. Thank you for listening to my voice for so long.
Thank you, Vice Principal Easter, for reminding us that reaching out to folks at school, the teacher, principal, vice principal, parent facilitator, can be one of the protective factors when we notice signs of trauma. Some of the things that are listed here on the slide, when we see that it's harder for our kids to focus, when we see some of those symptoms of flight, kids walking away from us. So thank you for pointing that out.
多謝Mr. 副校長同我哋講到咧，就係要尋求援助啦。家長，當你哋係留意到你哋嘅小朋友咧有呢個創傷嘅症狀出現咗嘅時候咧，佢哋用佢哋嗰個4個反應去面對事情嘅時候咧，你哋必須要行動，同埋咧，如果你哋係唔知道或者係需要幫助嘅時候，第一時間同學校嘅校長、家長聯絡員尋求聯絡幫助，我哋會有足夠嘅資源去幫助你㗎，呢個係好重要㗎。
Muchas gracias, señor Easter, dice la señorita Kwak, por dejarnos saber eso, que sí, hay personas en la escuela que nos pueden ayudar, especialmente cuando vemos que los niños se están desconectando de nosotros o cuando les queremos hablar y se están yendo. Por favor, tengan la confianza de que vamos a ayudarles de alguna manera u otra.
All right, so if we can go to the next slide. So what I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about is what are some things that we as educators and parents and adults in our kids' lives can do in our relationships with our children that can create protection and are protective factors for our children.
Miss Kwak 副校長同我哋校長同我哋講咧，就係作為教育工作者、作為家長、作為成人裏面咧，我哋可以喺小朋友嘅生命裏面咧，起做一個支援嘅因素，就係通過同佢哋建立關係，或者係喺嗰度去陪伴佢哋一齊走過呢個關係呢個困難嘅時候，咁而家有啲因素我哋可以講講嘅。
Lo que dice la señorita Kwak es que vamos a ver ahorita lo que es la relación del estudiante con el padre, porque la relación que tenemos nosotros con ellos y cómo poder, factores para poder protegerlos.
So how we are in conversation with our children, how we are when we're present with them while they're playing, talking, eating dinner together, all of these things can offer an opportunity for resiliency. And what resiliency is how we respond to trauma. And many of those things that Vice Principal Easter mentioned that could be healthy responses to trauma, but maybe not when the danger is more like television or scary images or memories.
好多時候咧，我哋喺小朋友嘅身邊陪佢哋。或者同佢哋一齊做一啲事情，或者睇電視或者乜嘢。當佢哋要講説話嘅時候咧，我哋聆聽佢，其實將自己嘅電話擺開其他啲騷擾嘅擺開，小心去聆聽，又或者係觀察佢同邊個一齊，觀察佢佢哋係同啲咩人講啲咩説話，咁你就可以察覺到佢哋而家係咪面對緊一個問題，係咪一個憂慮或者已經存在咗一個創傷嘅問題喺度，咁你就可以提出支援啦。最重要就係同佢哋溝通。
So una de las cosas que vamos a hablar es de lo que es resiliencia. Ser resiliente es cuando estamos, de la manera que reaccionamos cuando estamos teniendo alguna situación que no es buena.
All right, next slide, please. So, I love this image.
Dice que le encanta esta imagen.
So Vice Principal Boley and Vice Principal Easter both brought up for us how we are in a time where we're experiencing trauma. There's been a lot of really scary images that our kids have seen, a lot that we've been experiencing, fear that we've been experiencing during this time.
咁頭先兩個副校長都同我哋講過啦，喺呢個期間裏面咧，我哋都係經歷咗，見到好多啲畫面，你見到好多咧，會誘發小朋友咧就係有一個創傷喺度，令佢哋好擔憂㗎。咁因為而家個氣嘅環境就係咁樣啦。
So le dice la señorita Kwak que a ella le encanta esta imagen. El señor Easter, el subdirector, y la señorita Boyd, que también es subdirectora, nos hablaron de muchos de los traumas y estreses que están pasando nuestros estudiantes en estos tiempos.
And when we're responding to our children's stress or trauma, sometimes our own trauma may be present as well. And so one of the things that can help us, very similar to what Ms. Boley had us do at the beginning, is to really be present in our bodies, to remember to take a breath, feet on the floor, No judgment, just being present. We don't have to have all the answers with our children.
咁去幫助小朋友度過咧呢個困難嘅時候咧，其實有時候我哋作為大人，我哋自己都可能有呢個創傷喺度。我哋頭先一開始嘅時候，副校長同我哋講咧，我哋可以用3步諗下你最終你嘅親人令你快樂嘅事，同埋最終深呼吸，坐喺你嘅小朋友旁邊一齊去做呢啲動作，讓自己放鬆。有時候我哋揾唔到答案，解釋唔到，但係我哋用呢個態度去將自己放鬆。
So, una de las cosas que dijo la señora Bolly es de estar presente en el momento. ¿Y cómo vamos a hacer eso? Es poner nuestros pies sobre la tierra y estar ahí escuchándolos, sin juzgarlos, solamente escucharlos.
Okay, next slide, please. So as I said, we don't have to have all the answers. We don't even have to provide what we think this scary, stressful thing is about. Instead, ask questions. When the insurrection on the Capitol happened, we recommended to parents to ask their children, what have you heard? And how are you feeling? And then remember to listen.
我哋冇答案嘅好多時候，但係我哋可以提出一啲問題，大家去咧就去講下。家長可以聆聽小朋友想講啲乜嘢。我哋可以問，好似前2個禮拜嗰個，我哋國會發生過咁大嘅事件，你問小朋友，你聽到啲乜嘢啊？你個感覺係點樣啊？我哋問，讓小朋友講，我哋只係聽，咁已經可以係一個好好嘅宣泄同埋一個平衡嘅內心㗎啦。
Otra cosa es de que les puede hacer preguntas, no trate de darles una contestación, nada más escúchelos. A mejor pregúnteles, como por ejemplo, lo que pasó en el Capitolio, les recomendamos a los padres que les preguntaran a los niños, ¿qué es lo que has escuchado o qué has visto? ¿Y cómo te has sentido en base a eso?
And as we listen, we find out what are their questions? What are their misunderstandings and fears? Are they feeling like running away? Are they feeling like appeasing? So listening and asking an open-ended question like this allows for us to figure out how we might respond.
喺呢個聆聽過程中咧，你可能會聽到小朋友裏面，佢可能會選擇逃避啊，又或者選擇個咩方法去佢個感受，佢個感覺係咁樣。咁我哋會知道多咗好多嘢。從聆聽當中裏面咧，我哋更加了解當其時小朋友嗰個感受，咁你就會更加知道下一步你應該係會點樣去同佢哋傾偈，去點樣同佢哋咧係溝通，咁咧就會對比已經係俾到一個好好嘅支持佢哋㗎啦。
Solo lo que podemos hacer es escucharlos y es tratar de, ya escuchándolos, vamos a poder a lo mejor tener una mejor idea de cómo se están sintiendo y ya con eso vamos a poder preguntarles o contestarles alguna pregunta de la cual ellos tengan.
And just a aside, when my son was in middle school and I would be driving him and all his friends home from wrestling matches and from wherever I was taking them back from, this was the space where I was best able to have this kind of conversation. I didn't go up to him and say, hey, you're home from school. What have you heard? How are you feeling? So I had to also remember to be very present, listen as they were talking. And sometimes I was able to fit these questions in at those spaces where I noticed that he and oftentimes his friends were most willing to talk with me and be open. And a lot of times they weren't looking at me face to face. They were sitting right behind me.
Miss Scott 同我哋分享咧，佢話佢個仔咧喺讀中學嘅時候裏面咧，佢有時揸車載佢去參加唔同活動。喺路途上面，佢有一個好好嘅機會咧。同個小朋友好自然咁就打開佢話盒啦，咪喺當佢哋打開佢話盒裏面咧，佢更加了解到佢嘅仔嗰個感受，亦都係隨住咁樣咧，就去同佢做一個深入嘅交流啊。咁其實呢一個形式裏面咧，就係俾到好多小朋友嗰個內心一個正面嘅支持噶啦。
A veces con mi propio hijo, cuando él estaba en la escuela intermediaria, yo también tenía saber cómo hablar con él. No nada más de que cuando llegara de la escuela y algo había pasado, y me imaginaba que algo les habían platicado en la escuela, de empezar a cuestionarlos. ¿Qué hiciste? ¿O qué pasó? ¿Qué escuchaste? ¿Sabes lo que pasó hoy? Tener su tiempo, encontrar el momento correcto para poder hablar con su estudiante, estar presente en el momento, y si tiene algún amigo o amiga, encontrar alguna manera para poder entrar a esa conversación y hacerlos sentirse un poquito más a gusto para poder platicar con ellos. And I'm sorry to interrupt really quick, Miss Kwok, but I had a parent that says, but when kids are not present or they don't want to talk with us, what do we do?
Good. Okay. So the question was, when the kids aren't really being present with us or don't seem to want to engage in that conversation. So I'm going to go back to some of the first things that I said, because oftentimes we can't make it happen. And I invite my colleagues to jump in too. But part of it is how we are with them in those spaces and moments, even before they tell us or around that time that they tell us. So again, remembering to be really in that stance of listening, right? Being in that space where you're available to them. Another place that you might hear that or see that would be in their play, right? So with younger children, when they're playing with each other. In our older kids, I go back to the example of my son in middle school, how he and his friends are talking, right? So I wasn't looking at them, wasn't really in that interaction with them, but I was present in it and listening.
So, alguien tuvo una pregunta que era para cuando los niños no se prestan para hablar, ¿qué puede hacer uno? Y básicamente lo que dijo la señorita Kwok es, otra vez regresando al principio, es estar presente en el momento, encontrar alguna manera de poder hablar con nuestros niños, porque a veces tenemos, tanto ellos como nosotros de padres tenemos, no sabemos la manera de cómo hablar con ellos. Es un poco más fácil acostumbrándolos desde chicos, en alguna manera como empezar a jugar con ellos y luego metiendo ahí las preguntas y estar escuchándolos. Es una cosa muy importante que dijo, es escuchar.
剛才有一位家長咧就問啦，佢話如果我小朋友根本就唔想同我講啊，我知佢有問題，但係佢唔想講，亦都唔想同我對話，咁我應該點做咧？咁Miss Kwok 校長咧就係話啦有嘅時候我哋即係唔係話真係可以話要講嘅就講到嘅，所以就家長咧就係要有一個觸覺喺度啦。好多時候你喺佢身邊嘅時候，你留意佢同其他小朋友玩或者係講嘅時候，佢有冇展現到佢有呢個創傷喺度咧，或者唔開心咧，或者有壓力咧？咁你就用家長嘅觸覺。去感受去明白到，咁喺適當嘅時候咧，你就可以帶出有重要嘅就係讓小朋友知道，你哋係家長，係你喺佢身邊，你哋係願意同佢哋一齊經歷㗎。咁喺適當嘅時候咧，佢就會願意講㗎。所以就係話最翻嚟就係家長要時刻留意啦，用自己嘅觸覺同埋係讓小朋友係有機會感受到你哋喺佢身邊嘅，呢個好重要。
The other thing is when our children are not speaking with us or letting us know that they don't want to talk about it, that's information too, right? How are they feeling? What have they heard? They're telling us something. They're telling us how they're feeling. And so you may be seeing a sign of a response to trauma like flight, walking away from it, trying to get away from it. And so, part of your response might even be to just note it, to just reflect and say what you're seeing. I see you don't want to talk about this right now. I see you're walking away from me right now. And then just be present in another moment.
其實頭先咧就校長啱講，我哋回應翻你話嗰個家長話唔同我講嘢，小朋友其實已經係一個信息已經俾到你㗎啦。呢個小朋友係選擇靜咗落嚟，又或者選擇逃避，唔同你講，唔去面對，其實已經有一個信息，你可以同佢講媽媽爸爸已經留意到你有呢個問題，我哋睇到你唔開心或者壓力，咁就都可以變成一個打開嘅話盒嘅。
Otra cosa también es estar presente en el momento, tratar de hablar con ellos y estar más enganchados a escucharlos y también a que ellos hagan mismo preguntas.
Can I add also, this is Rachel Vitania speaking, that the important thing is opening this space. Students may not be ready to enter and show up in that space, but just the act of opening the space and letting students know that you're holding that safe space for them to come into when they're ready is really, really important, a really important protective factor. We have to be careful that our response to trauma isn't the trauma.
Miss Victoria 你啱同我哋分享咧，就係話咧，我哋要讓小朋友知道，我哋係喺度嘅，隨時佢哋需要嘅時候，可以同家長講，可以同爸爸媽媽講嘅。我哋要明白小朋友而家已經係面對緊一個創傷，佢已經承受緊一個壓力喺度，已經有一個痛苦喺度。咁我哋唔應該係再俾第二個壓力佢嘅。但係仲讓佢哋知道爸爸媽媽喺身邊，隨時係俾佢支援，呢個信息係好重要嘅。
La señora Rachel Botana dice que hay que saber también que ellos tienen ese espacio, que es un espacio seguro. No va a haber críticas, ni que en este momento pueden ellos hablar libremente y vamos a estar ahí presente para ellos.
And what I mean by making sure that our response to the trauma isn't the trauma is that we're being gentle, we're being patient, we're being kind. So we're avoiding those like rigid, forceful moments where we're making children feel like they have to show up when they're not ready to do so.
我哋小朋友已經係面對緊創傷，我哋要確保我哋唔會製造另外一個壓迫感俾佢哋嚇。我哋要用溫柔啦，關心嘅説話同態度同佢哋講嘢。
Y ella dice que lo que ella dice por no tener un momento traumático es que les dejemos saber que van a estar ahí sin críticas, que se van a sentir seguros y que vamos a estar ahí presentes para ellos.
Next slide. Another way that we create safety within that space, right? The other way that we create a protective space. Going back to being in the car with my son in the back seat and his friends. Let's say we're driving home and I have the news on and the events of the day, events of COVID, events in the Capitol, all of that is just rolling, right? All on the radio. And oftentimes, on some of those on the news, it will repeat over and over again, the same information. But to our minds, to our bodies, hearing it again is like re-experiencing that stress and trauma again. So one of the protective things that we can do is to really limit like the exposure that our students have to information that they may not be ready for, and limiting how it's just kind of running in the background. I know all of us sometimes just have our TVs on in the background, just on.
好多時候咧，就係我哋會聽到呢啲唔好嘅消息，重複又重複，就好似如果你喺個車裏面校長講咧，同佢嘅仔同佢嘅佢啲同學仔坐喺車後面，咁佢又開咗個心機，咁不斷有啲新聞咧，唔好嘅消息暴力嗰啲信息咧就唔好嘅，不斷咁重複講啊，咁小朋友就每一次聽就呢啲就入咗去。其實就喺一個唔好嘅信息裏面再加一次又一次咁樣，所以我哋要去限制呢啲唔好嘅信息。作為家長，我哋作為大人，我哋要限制減少呢啲信息喺度，已經知道，但係每一次再講嘅時又重複一次咧，只係負面嘅啫。所以咧就係要讓小朋友減少接觸，同埋要確保佢哋係安全嘅。我哋要話俾佢聽，我哋會做到大人喺身邊去保護佢哋。
Otra cosa, recordando de que vamos a suponer la señora Kwak dice, traigo a mi hijo en el carro y un amigo y están escuchando la radio y en la radio están hablando del COVID y lo que pasó en el Capitolio y otra vez vuelven a repetir la cosa una y otra vez. Tenemos que recordar de que hay que tratar de evitar esas cosas, de que los muchachos o los estudiantes estén escuchando eso una y otra vez, porque están otra vez reviviendo el trauma.
And another protective factor is to remind our children and oftentimes even ourselves in that moment that we are safe and what we will do to continue to keep them safe, right? So listening to the news, hearing the news, remember, we're here in the car together. We're all okay right now. We're together and we're going home and we're going going to eat dinner. You know, and it depends on the kid's age, what might remind them, what might make them feel safe, but just reminding and even naming those things that are okay and that are safe in this moment.
小朋友可以聽到嗰啲信息係負面嘅咧，亦都係讓佢哋好擔憂嘅時候，我哋作為家長，我哋確保我哋而家喺埋一齊嚇，爸爸媽媽同你喺埋一齊，你係安全嘅，爸爸媽媽亦都會係繼續努力係確保你嘅安全，讓佢哋唔需要擔心，唔需要怕，因為有你哋嘅存在，呢個係減低佢哋喺創傷喺啲負面嘅信息嘅壓力㗎。
Y otra vez, recuérdenles que están en el carro, porque claro, están escuchando esto, se ponen nerviosos o les da un poco de miedo. Recuérdenles que ahorita están todos en el carro, están seguros, van en rumbo a casa, van a comer su cena, pero están todos juntos.
Next slide. And finally, I love to always bring up Mr. Rogers. I'm an older person, so Mr. Rogers was a big part of my childhood. But oftentimes we hear this quote in times of crisis and times of trauma. He shared that when he was a boy and would see scary things in the news, his mom would say, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping."
咁呢位名人咧就講一句好好嘅説話去鼓勵我哋。佢話啦，當我細個嘅時候咧，當我見到嗰啲好驚嗰啲新聞嘅時候咧，我就好驚㗎啦。咁媽媽就會同我講：你睇下，身邊有啲人會嚟幫你㗎。咁佢就會冇咁驚啦，佢就知道唔怕，係有人幫我嘅。
So una cosa, dice ella, yo ya soy una persona mayor, y una cosa que siempre recuerdo es al señor Rogers que está aquí en este slide, y dice que una cosa que él decía era que cuando él era un niño y veía cosas que le daban miedo en las noticias, su mamá siempre le decía, busca a las personas que están ayudando, siempre vas a encontrar personas ayudando.
But we can also be the helpers too with our children. We can look for ways that we can take action. So some examples might be oftentimes with younger children, that action might take part, you might see that in their play, in their artwork. Oftentimes younger children will make a piece of artwork for another person that expresses their wishes, right? So those are ways that younger children can take action. Middle school aged and high school aged children, fifth graders get really involved at this season of service, period of peace, make videos about what they care most about the rights that they care most about. And they show that expression through art, song, presentations. So taking action, we know, is yet another way that we can really protect and become more resilient around some of the stresses and traumas that we experience.
咁好多時候我哋大人，我哋自己家長就係嗰個身份去幫佢哋嗰個人啦。我哋都可以鼓勵小朋友喺呢個疫症期間裏面咧，低細嘅小朋友都可以做嘅喎。譬如佢可以畫張畫啦擺上同埋分享啦，鼓勵其他嘅小朋友咧。大少少嘅小朋友，佢哋可能會做一個演講詞或者做一個短劇咁去鼓舞其他啲人嘅。當中一定會揾到一啲工作，你係可以做去幫其他人嘅。雖然我哋而家唔可以接觸其他人，但係一定有啲嘢咧可以揾到去做。呢個係將佢轉化成一個積極嘅行動。當通過去幫助別人嘅時候，咁自然咧就嗰個困擾咧就係壓力就會減低啦。
Pero nosotros también, dice la señorita Kwak, nosotros también podemos ayudar a nuestros hijos, empezando de cuando están ellos pequeños, los podemos empezar a ayudar y a involucrarlos en diferentes cosas. A los niños que ya están en la secundaria o la preparatoria se envuelven en lo que se llama el tiempo de paz y hacen actividades diferentes en las escuelas, ya sea en la secundaria o la preparatoria.
It's not easy, you know, as a parent, it's not easy. As educators who are with our kids, this time is not easy. And what I remind myself is that our children are watching us, and they're watching how we react. And they even are watching how we seek out help for ourselves. And so Vice Principal Easter brought that up, that it's okay to get more help. Our children seeing us go to the principal, going to the parent facilitator and asking for support is even modeling how they can protect themselves as they get older. And so I want to bring that up also. And their next set of slides are going to talk about some ways that if you feel like you need support, you can reach out to us in the district as well.
喺呢個困難時期咧，疫症期間裏面，我哋大家都經歷好多困難，唔單止係小朋友，甚至我哋大人，我哋教育工作者都係你知嘛？小朋友係睇住我哋㗎。作為大人，我哋當唔知道點樣去做嘅時候咧，我哋去尋求，小朋友就會學到係可以去問，去尋求幫助。咁如果我哋嗰個用正面嘅態度去回應，去面對我哋而家嘅壓力嘅時候，小朋友都會學會用正面積極嘅態度去回應。當我哋去尋求幫助嘅時候，小朋友亦都會去尋求幫助。正如Easter 先生佢頭先講過係冇問題㗎。我哋同學校聯絡，同校長聯絡，同我哋嘅家長聯絡員去尋求幫助轉下落嚟咧，我哋會有啲資源提供俾大家。
Ahorita en las siguientes, pues como dijo primero, hay muchas maneras de que les pueden ayudar. A veces no sabemos cómo, pero ahorita vamos a darles alguna información sobre cómo y dónde pueden recibir la ayuda, ya sea fuera de la escuela.
So I know we're out of time. I have so many things to add to this conversation. It's a big one, and we only had time to scratch the surface. But I do want to go over, if you are concerned about your child and you're looking for more support, one thing you can do is contact us or your child's principal or vice principal, parent facilitator. We're lucky to be in San Leandro Unified, where there are supports for kids. And so we really encourage you to reach out to us. That's what we're here for.
由於時間關係啦，咁我哋再想提一提大家，就係當你覺得你嘅小朋友係有需要，你係亦都需要尋求幫助，唔好擔心嚇，即刻同我哋校區你哋學校嘅校長同埋我哋嘅工作人員聯繫，我哋會提供任何有需要嘅能力幫到小朋友嘅資源，我哋會提供俾你㗎。
Tenemos más cosas que nos gustaría dar la información, se nos acabó el tiempo, pero por favor busquen a la persona en la escuela donde les pueden ayudar y también a sus facilitadores de padres, directores o maestros para poder recibir ayuda o asistencia en cualquiera de las cosas de las cuales están pasando sus estudiantes ahorita.
Yeah, and we can go to the next slide. There's some more resources. So there's Care Solace that your principal can get you connected with. And the next one shows the Family Resource Center. And the next one.
Y estos son algunos de los recursos donde pueden contactar ayuda o pedir ayuda.
剛才都係啲資源服務嚇。
And then finally, the Native American Health Clinic. Something I heard my colleagues say a lot tonight is to normalize conversations in your home so that your child knows that it's normal and okay to have the feelings that they're feeling. And I would add that we adults need to lead that by normalizing the discussions in our homes and in our communities and in our schools to include our wellness and how we're dealing with the things around us. Sometimes we try to go so fast and we think that that's something that's on the side, but we know that it's front and center now and always. So I encourage us to come together in community to figure out how we want to honor that part of our lives in all the spaces that we're in.
咁咧就係總結就係希望家庭裏面咧保持咗一個正常嘅溝通，用平和嘅聲線、關懷嘅聲線同孩子溝通，同埋記住緊記就係當你有需要嘅時候尋求協助、尋求資源，同學校聯絡、同社區聯絡，我哋會有足夠嘅協調俾你支援俾你㗎。
So, por favor, aquí están los lugares, es todo muchas cosas que están pasando, pero es a lo que estamos viviendo ahorita. Siéntase libre de contactar a cualquier persona y también tener un espacio seguro donde usted pueda comunicarse con sus estudiantes y tener un poquito más de paciencia porque están pasando por cosas que no son lo que estamos acostumbrados normalmente a tener.
And our last slides just say we're in this together. And thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you all.
我哋係一齊面對呢個困境，多謝你哋。記住，你唔係孤單㗎，我哋一齊面對。多謝。
Y dice que gracias a todos por haber venido esta noche. La última dice, estamos en esto juntos, es difícil y no están solos. Muchas gracias por haber venido esta noche y comuníquese con la persona que necesiten. Si alguien gusta quedarse y hacer alguna pregunta o hablar con una de nosotros, siéntase libre de hacerlo.
Have a good night, everyone.
好，晚安，再見。
Buenas noches. Miss Rachel?
Yes.
I have a couple parents in Spanish. Si se quieren quitar pueden poner altavoz para poder hablar. Tengo, I have Miss Aida Melero and Miss Berta, who are very concerned for their students. They have students in John Muir and Wilson.
Okay, I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you can ask them to email me, I just don't want them to put their student name in the chat for privacy reasons. So ask them to send me an email with their student and I will reach out as soon as possible.
Okay, so señora Berta y señora Aida, si por favor, pueden poner su correo electrónico en el chat para que ellos se comuniquen con ustedes para ver cómo les pueden ayudar.
OK， 家長佢哋真係有問題嘅，咁你可以問翻你哋嘅校長嚇。OK， 發短信，如果你都係有其他嘅需要，我歡迎你打電話俾我，我會幫助你哋。OK， 好，再見，我哋學完㗎啦。OK， 拜拜。Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Ahí está el correo electrónico de la señora y por favor conéctense con ella para poder ayudar, ¿ok?
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Gracias, buenas noches.